No, the situation is not the same in Canada, and people usually misinterpret because we think whatever happens in the U.S. happens here. The FCC made a mistake, big mistake. We knew it in Canada 18 years ago. They categorized the internet as not being a telecom service. Now it turns out they don't have jurisdiction to monitor abuses of content management on the internet. They knew that when they issued their rules. We knew there was a whole fuss around net neutrality. In Canada, it's black and white. We never took it away from the jurisdiction. CRTC can intervene at any time, can investigate, it's got all the powers. There's no net neutrality problem in Canada. If there is one, we have the laws there to prevent it and the powers are there. Whereas in the US, they've had this problem all along, and the courts have recently said the FCC was wrong, didn't have jurisdiction. They were all in a snit about that mistake they made 18 years ago.
And we should be in a snit now.
But we do have throttling.
That's our problem, not neutrality. And prices for broadband in Canada have been deregulated. The Commission has no control over them.
Yeah, and that, I wanted to make the point that you're just making. I mean, you know, I don't know if anybody else has had this experience, but I had my internet service provider stole my unlimited access plan from me completely randomly one day. Just, I got a bill the next month that was twice what I'd been paying before. So, and there's no way to complain about this as a consumer or a citizen. You can't do anything about it. You can go to the CCTS and they have no power to do anything on your behalf. So
one of the reasons that's happening, by the way, is that Canada is one of only 2 countries in the entire OECD that uses bit caps on broadband. So once you start those immersive environments, 75 gigabytes is all that Bell gives you on their 25 megabit per second service. It's ridiculous. You can run that up in an hour or 2.
Okay, David, you're getting an undue preference here, which we've got to be careful about, okay? So we want to bring a couple of other people in, and I you know, there's a couple of issues. I'd like to hear what you guys, some questions you have out there, but there's a couple of issues that I wonder about. You know, we touched on the copyright issue. I know there's a lot of passion around there, and I'd like you guys to have your chance to challenge our panelists on that if you see fit. I'm also wondering a little bit, and Nathan, you touched on it slightly, I think, about the incumbents in the industry and the newcomers in the industry, and how you level the playing field, or if it should indeed be leveled, and whether new entrants, and perhaps you're not feeling this at all, I think perhaps in the content area, content creators, digital content creators are, whether it's difficult to get access, and indeed whether funds are tilted towards supporting the current system.
So let me see if I understand the question, because I look at this from a few perspectives. We obviously, as an entrepreneur, straight access to capital, venture capital, has very little to do with the pipes and who's putting money back into the system. But I did hear you ask the question of wind, which was, how are you going to pay for that? How are you going to put money back in so people are creating? Of course, Andrea's sitting here. Well, there's Andrea, and Bell Fund is obviously a great example of somebody who supported us and lots of other great companies. So I think we do have some funds. I don't think we have great policy. I think we could do a lot in that area in terms of incentivizing more. Obviously, I also agree with increasing the competition because we get problems like the one you're describing. But I always come back to, and I think Raja on the last panel said it great, and I did love that panel. And when we talk about the future, I think that panel had a lot to do with the future. But Raja's comment, which, what was his comment? It was essentially he stopped going to the funds. And because he wanted to just get out of the cycle of worrying about those. So I come back to that point of view. I mean, we've been beneficiaries of the funds, and it's been fantastic for us. Through the dot-com crash, having the opportunity to come back to Canada and work with that money and create some amazing innovative content has been the basis of any success that we do have. So I'm a big fan of the funds and the support that we have here in Ontario. What I'd really like to see is the next stage of support, so the venture capital money. And I don't know if there's something that the carriers could do to support that. I think mainly of the government support that could happen. I have an idea that I think is a little crazy sounding.
Go for a crazy sounding idea.
I would love the idea of the government putting, I know there's some venture capital matching in the province of Ontario, we have this, but they actually take equity in the companies. Well, we just spent, I don't know how much it is, 800 million we've committed to Ubisoft to come to the province. So French companies coming here, and we're going to give, and a lot of it's through tax credits. I think that's fantastic. But why don't we have 50 million that is VC matching money that actually doesn't need equity, doesn't need special rights in terms of the government, choosing who we pick the VC firms that do well. We invite some great VC firms in from the Valley. We take 50 of the 800 million that we're giving to Ubisoft and we give it to the small startups who started with Bell Fund money, who started with OMDC money, and we get them to stage 2. Because all the stage 2 guys are going to the Valley. And we say, I heard somebody comment, I think it was Robert Montgomery over lunch, saying, well, they're finding they don't have good return on their investment, so it's hard to get the money. Well, let me tell you, they're probably not talking to the guys that I'm talking to. I mean, we did bring up Ripple. Peter Thiel, who started PayPal, funded a company here in Ontario. Angel invested actually in 3 different companies. But I don't think anybody at the funds in Ontario has ever talked to those guys. So there's a disconnect. We have the companies here, and I know the guys at Founders Fund who started Plaxo, Napster, Facebook. Those guys know that we have these neat companies here in Ontario, but we don't seem to know that. So I think there's an opportunity policy-wise where we could do stuff.
When you talk to companies across the country in technology, the biggest barrier to their growth is a lack of capital, and it's true that we call it market failure or whatever. The depth and the expertise and the breadth of availability of venture capital in the U.S. is so much greater than Canada, that when our companies reach a certain size, they disproportionately then have to get brought out and moved to the U.S.
Do they have to get bought out? I mean, capital
cannot-
flows
there- you-
over borders.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We
They don't have to, I
They're
think, is the end.
encouraged
Yeah.
to incorporate in states to access the U.S. VC funding. I think you're absolutely right, and I think Nathan's right that there is a model. The model that we've seen in some provinces is the provincial government gives a fund matching funds to invest. The issue with that, and this is a challenge to content creators in the room, is you guys as content creators have to deliver results, or the VC money is going to dry up. And I think one issue, and I'll be very provocative here, that we have in this country is we've gotten to the point that we're used to creating content without necessarily thinking through what the market for that content will be and whether it will deliver financial benefit to its investors.
First of all, I don't think a lot of VCs invest in content. So I want to be clear that all the stuff that we've gone out to raise venture capital for has been...
I use that term
Yeah,
loosely.
loosely.
I would include applications. I would include.
Well, that's
you
an
know,
important thing to say, because I think, when we talk about content funds, we often exclude platforms and
Right,
technologies that
right.
enable. And,
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's all that anybody really wants to finance anyhow.
Right.
They don't want to finance old-fashioned
a picture.
content because the return isn't there, is it?
Right. The risk is that there is some.
Which takes us back into public policy, I guess, and perhaps takes us back to the question. I mean, the digital world has the great benefit of being global, just inherently global, and your product can go wherever your product will go. So that should be good.
Right.
Market should be better for you. At the same time, first of all, I'm not sure that we're leveraging that properly, and I don't know what the impediment is, and perhaps you can tell. Also, I just wonder, is it old-fashioned 1950s to think about Canadian identity, Canadian stories, Canadian story sharing? A political entity called Canada doesn't need a cultural entity around it. Is that just totally passé? Because certainly protectionism, which has been one way we've done that, ain't going to stand anymore. Okay, we'll give you. You've taken a few minutes off in the penalty.
I tried.
You're back, and then.
I think one of the really important differences between old media and new media is that old media is impersonal, one way, top down. The TV set is a tethered device. You just get there's nothing, you can't interact with it. There's a kind of interactive television, but that's nothing at all like a computer that's attached to the internet. And what has happened ever since people began using these devices, network devices, is that it has turned out, amongst consumers now, that the primary applications that people favor in North America are email, personal messaging, productivity, and other stuff.
Games.
All produced content is way down the list compared to email. For the last 12 years, every survey I've ever looked at, that's what people do most. That's just the way it is. I'm not saying that there's no room for anything else. It just shifts the whole balance around. And so telling Canadian stories takes a different position now in the queue, I think, compared to telling the stories on TV, where you had a closed universe and a captive audience.
I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I don't think the Americans think very much, we're not going to tell American stories. Nobody's going to want to watch that around the world. There's a big shift going on. The analog world, broadcasting, were licenses that were national. If you're a Canadian, you can't get a U.S. broadcasting license. The world was cut up in little parts. You had to make your deals with the broadcasters in each country to get your stuff out. The difference with the digital world and the internet is the whole world is your oyster. You can think big. As I really like the expression of Raja in the previous panel, we tend to think small. So with the internet, there's nothing to prevent us from getting our stories out to the whole world.
Right.
I'm not going to comment about Canadian content and its importance just generally, but there is one area where I feel very strongly that telling Canadian stories is vital, and that is in our education system. I think having a Canadian identity to our country is absolutely important as Canadian citizens. I think, and that starts with knowing about your country, understanding where it comes from, understanding its culture, its history, and telling Canadian stories. And one of the areas where the policy or the Canadian policy has kind of gone in a way that is quite dangerous for being able to have these stories told in the classroom is the exception. Now I'm going to go back to copyright, the long list of exceptions that were introduced in Bill C-32. A lot of these exceptions apply in the education sector, which means that publishers and Canadian writers are going to have a harder time getting paid for the use of their works in the classroom, which means that they're not going to be able to survive, and they're going to produce a lot less Canadian stories, Canadian textbooks, for the classroom.
I was hoping this would come back to copyright at some point, so that's good. Thank you for that. Listen, I've been getting signs, visioning signs from the organizers, which went 10 minutes, 5 minutes, minus 2 minutes, minus 4 minutes. Time is up on that. But we're up here and we're in control. They're not. So if there's a last question, a final question from you guys, that would be really good. So somebody, anybody? And if not, I'm going to give a final comment to Nathan. You want a final comment?
Sure, I'd love to.
But hang on. First, you've got to give them a chance.
Yeah,
so
go.
you guys trump Nathan if you go. Otherwise, you have to listen to Nathan.
It's a motivation.
Okay, Nathan it is.
Well, I just wanted to tie a couple of thoughts together and then maybe leave, my last note would be about the future because that was the name of the panel, but just to tie a couple of thoughts. A quick opinion on the Canadian content. I like it when Canadians are telling stories. Regardless, if we can encourage that, I think a lot follows from there. The education stuff was interesting because we did a History Game Canada, recognized at the White House, Chicago-based MacArthur Prize, but not very well known here in Canada. So it's fascinating what happens there.
And did you make money on it?
Well, Telefilm funded that project. I lost money on it, but actually we're really proud of doing it. So that was secondary for me in that particular case. But about the future, I just
at least you have contentment, if not money.
We were very happy about it. And in fact, one interesting thing that came out of going to the White House event was that we met the CTO of the United States, who works directly for the president in the White House. A lot of folks are across the street. He's not. So that was a really amazing eye-opener in terms of policy, and he's the first CTO they've ever had. My comment on future just came out of a great conference, a different one, but in DC as well, was thinking about, it goes back to my original thing about innovation being an overlay for us, and all the media mixing, and all the technology overlay on all the different media that we work with. And we all know that one of the most profound things happening now in innovation in the future is the social graph being overlaid on a lot of these businesses that we know. So Facebook changing how we interact with people and so on. I just want to throw out that there's more overlays coming very, very soon. And so this, in terms of leaving us with a note on the future, there's the interest graph. We're learning more about what people like and don't like. So when you overlay the interest graph, just like the social graph, it fundamentally changes how businesses work. There's the geospatial graph, and we're seeing that with the movement of mobile devices. So when you overlay where people are with their interest graph, and a temporal a set of information about when they're doing stuff, what they like to do and where they are doing it, top of who they know and who they're friends with, the changes are phenomenal. So think about those additional things as are coming. If you were blindsided by the social graph, these things are coming, and everything's accelerating. The pace of all this change is accelerating. So anyway, that's my future note.
Well, thank you very much, and I want to thank the whole panel. That was very lively. David, I thank you for your restraint as a second half, although I'm sure lots of people want to talk to you about your issues now. So that was, for me, a good beginning of a visioning of the future. We've got, it's an ongoing process of visioning, as you know. So thank you very much for your patience there holding up the sign. We're done.